Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to U.S. History Through Film. As we now talk a little bit about the video worksheet that accompanied the movie Amistad. Now, starting with number 1, the movie begins with the slave trying to get a nail out of a piece of wood. That's cinque, of course. That's slightly dramatized beyond the real events, although they were dramatic enough. Cinque did not, in fact, pull a nail out of the woodwork of the ship. But either he or a woman found a file lying around the ship somewhere and hid it until he was able to use that to pick the lock on his chains and get free. Number 17 mentions John Quincy Adams wanting to turn the bequest of James Smithson into an Institute of National Treasure. That, of course, would become the Smithsonian Institute. And, in fact, the Englishman James Smithson left a lot of money. About $11.7 million in today's money to the United States for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. They spent years debating exactly what to do about that. Finally, they decided to create an institution for scientific research, and John Quincy Adams played a very important role in the process of creating the Smithsonian Institution, although not in fact till 1846, a few years later than what's shown in the movie. My apologies. There's number 17. To turn the bequest of James Smithson into an Institute of National Treasure. Number 21 says the president, meaning Martin Van Buren, is only thinking about re-election, which in a way is probably true. But all the scenes showing Van Buren campaigning for re-election are totally inaccurate. Presidential candidates at this time did not really campaign for re-election on their own behalf. It was viewed as undignified for someone at that level to go around begging for people's votes. At most, a presidential candidate might give some speeches in his hometown. Certainly, he might arrange to give a few more speeches or public appearances than average, but again, to give the appearance of actively campaigning would be undignified, demeaning. No major candidate for the presidency would actively campaign in this way until William Jennings Bryan did it in 1896, and he lost to William McKinley, who gave speeches to selected groups of dignitaries from the front porch of his house in Ohio. 1912 would be the first campaign in which all the major candidates actively campaigned for themselves. Number 25 presents James Baldwin as wanting $2.50 a day. He wants to get paid. And that's not really accurate. Baldwin did accept a token fee for his services, but he was not in this case for the money. He really believed in the anti-slavery cause. And while a lot of people were angry about the Amistad case, it didn't destroy his business because many people supported the slave side of the case too, especially in New England. Although it was technically true that slavery was still legal in Connecticut, which is why the Navy men who salvaged the ship sailed it to Connecticut instead of New York, even though that was slightly closer. New York had completely banned slavery by this point. Number 27 gives us Professor Josiah Gibbs and presents us as pretty silly, although in number 37 they do show him a little more respect. Really, that's not fair. Gibbs was an accomplished linguist, and it was actually he who wandered the docks in New Haven and New York, as shown in number 38. James Covey really was the name of one of two Mende speakers whom Gibbs found again wandering around the docks, counting out loud in Mende. And Covey's story is pretty much the way they tell it in the movie. Gibbs also helped teach English to the Mende and helped recruit a number of Yale divinity students to teach the Mende both English and Christianity. Many of them accepted both. And Gibbs later helped write a dictionary of Mende and other West African languages. So in the movie, especially early on, Professor Gibbs is pretty silly. In real life, that's not really fair. They're playing it for humor, which, is okay. Number 34 introduces Judge Coghlan, who's actually a fictional character. Judge Andrew Judson actually presided over the entire case at the district court level, actually surprised people by ruling in favor of the slaves, as shown in number 49. Because typically he was not opposed to slavery on a personal level. He was not especially supportive of racial equality. Van Buren, as we saw, then did appeal the case to the Supreme Court, as shown in number 53, which upheld Judson's ruling to free the slaves, as shown, but overturned his ruling they be transported back to Africa at the government's expense. Instead, private charities, mostly organized by Lewis Tappan, paid for everyone who wanted to go back to Africa to do so, and sent along with them a number of American missionaries in 1842, a year after the end of the story in the film. But while Coghlan was fictional, the prejudice against Catholics that he worried about was real. Many Protestant Americans worried that Catholics were not really even Christian. Many worried they could not be real citizens of a democracy because their first loyalty would be to the Pope in Rome, and he would influence their votes. As late as the 1960 presidential election, there were those who feared that if John F. Kennedy were elected, he would install a telephone line directly from the White House to the Vatican. Despite this prejudice, which was definitely widespread and real, by the time the movie is set, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court himself was a Catholic, Roger B. Taney, appointed in 1836 by Andrew Jackson. Although it's true that prominent Catholics were pretty rare in politics outside of Maryland, and although Roger B. Taney did have a statue for a long time in Baltimore, it has recently been torn down. Moving back a bit to number 39, it is said in the film the Africans must bury a dead man or his soul will haunt them forever. And in the end, they let them do it in the movie. That's probably not very realistic. There was a very strong effort to convert the Africans to Christianity from the start, and it was pretty successful. When they were finally declared free by the Supreme Court, they praised Jesus for the decision. And certainly there would have been no interest among the people holding the Africans, either their friends or those who disliked them, from preserving any non-Christian religious beliefs they might have held. So the African prisoners probably would not have been so insistent on a traditional funeral. Even if they had been, it's not so likely they would have gotten to actually perform it. Number 42, do African people enslave other Africans? They certainly did, and in fact still do in some places. But indeed, Cinque himself had actually been captured and enslaved by other Africans sometime before being resold to the white slave traders who eventually carried him across the Atlantic. Number 45 is true. Slave ships did sometimes dump their slaves overboard to try to hide what they had been doing. They would also dump 6 slaves overboard so they wouldn't infect the others. On the other hand, number 46 says there's no evidence the Takora, or I think probably pronounced Tesora, actually dumped any slaves overboard on this trip. And if so, they certainly didn't do so because of running low on food. The Takora was a purpose-built slave ship designed to carry people but also travel quickly to avoid interception by the British or American navies. Its crew were professionals. They would not have sailed from Africa so low on supplies they would have to dump half their slaves overboard. They may have been cruel, but they weren't stupid. Number 52 is not realistic. In the movie, Lewis Tappan suggests the slaves may be more valuable to his cause in death than in life, as martyrs, as a symbol of the wickedness of slavery. And again, that's not true to Tappan's personality, although some may have felt that way. I think some did feel that way, but not Tappan. He did not want the slaves to die to prove a point. In fact, there was an opportunity to drag the case out longer and possibly win more of some sort, or make the point even more firmly than they already were that slavery was bad. But Tappan insisted that if there was a chance to end the case with the Africans being freed, that should be done. They'd been in jail for 18 months already, and if they could go home, that's what should happen, even if there might be some symbolic value in dragging things out longer. Number 54 in the movie says that 7 of 9 Supreme Court justices were Southern slave owners, which at this point is not true. Of the Supreme Court judges, only 5 were Southerners. Of them, only 4 were slave owners. Although it's definitely true the Supreme Court was not typically sympathetic to the anti-slavery movement at this point. Not at this point. No. Number 56 is a beautiful scene, I think. Cinque's impressed by John Quincy Adams' African Violet. He sees it and recognizes something beautiful from his home. Except he wouldn't have. African violets, as far as we know, were not imported to the United States until the late 1880s. Adams would not have had one in 1840. And furthermore, they come from East Africa. So even if Adams could have owned one, Cinque would not have recognized it and been touched by it any more than I might be impressed by a flower from Idaho, although I'm sure there are beautiful flowers in Idaho. Number 58 through 62. 58 saying the case concerns the very nature of man. As far back as one chooses to look, slavery has always been with us. Saying Cinque is the only hero in the room, all we are is who we were. All that, and even 62, that a civil war might be the last battle of the American Revolution, are partly based on Adams' closing speech to the Supreme Court, although many parts of his speech are invented. His entire speech ran over 8 hours. Baldwin had spoken for 4 hours the previous day. And a Supreme Court justice noticed that John Quincy Adams' speech was notable for its bitter sarcasm, much of it directed towards Van Buren, who he described as acting like a servant of the Spanish government and of the South. The Adamses were very good at bitterness. On the other hand, many parts are invented, and number 63, the opinion read by the Supreme Court justice is mostly fictional. Although the main point, upholding the lower court rulings that the Africans had been illegally captured and thus could not be held as slaves, is correct. The Supreme Court ordered them freed. The speaker is identified in the captions as being the Chief Justice. But in fact, he is actually Associate Justice Joseph Story. Chief Justice Taney having no sympathy for the slaves as far as I can tell. An interesting touch, the actor who plays Associate Justice Joseph Story in the movie was actually retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Harry Blackmun. So an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court playing an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Number 65 depicts British soldiers, Marines probably, in the Royal Navy destroying the slave fortress at Lomboko. And this is mostly true. The Lomboko slave fortress did exist, although it's not nearly as impressive as shown in the movie. It was mostly a mansion for the man in charge of the outpost and the various outbuildings for its owner and barracks to hold slaves awaiting sale, not a massive castle on the African coast. The British did eventually locate and destroy the Lomboko slave fortress, although not until 1849, several years after they're shown doing so in the movie. Number 66, William Henry Harrison defeating Van Buren and becoming the 9th President of the United States is true. Although Van Buren later tried to win the presidency again, first trying unsuccessfully to get the Democratic nomination in 1844, and then running as a third-party candidate in 1848 with the Free Soil Party, because by that point he had come to publicly oppose the expansion of slavery into Western territories. Incidentally, while the Free Soil Party never won an election themselves, they later merged with Whigs opposed to slavery and other opponents of slavery to form a new political party in the 1850s, known as the Republicans. Van Buren playing a role then in the creation of the Republican Party, whereas a few decades before, he had basically invented the Democratic Party. So Martin Van Buren may be depicted as a fool in the film, but, like it or not, he gave us both our political parties that we enjoy today.